Hello, and welcome to this week's Town Hall, which is the second to be hosted by Yana's Youth Caucus. Today, our topic is voting. My name is Glenn Houlihan, he, him pronouns, and I'm Yana's Youth Caucus and Media Coordinator. And as I'm hosting today, I'm also obligated to point out that this session is paid for by Yana for YO, although our funding didn't extend to that sign. Would everybody else on the call like to briefly introduce themselves? Just name, pronouns, their role in the campaign if they have one. Starting with Donatelia.
Hi, so my name is Donatelia. I go by she, her pronouns. I am the graphic specialist for Yana's campaign. I also try to do a lot of volunteer work on the side. Yeah, that's what I do. I think it's Spencer's turn.
Awesome. My name is Spencer. He, him pronouns. I am the code and video and just guy on Yana's team. So yeah, that's me.
My name's Sean. I go by he, him pronouns. I am the website manager and video captioning person. So nice to meet y'all.
Fantastic, and thank you all for being here. It's really appreciated. So Sean, would you mind getting us started with some information about voting, especially specifically related to Wyoming?
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. So first off, one of the biggest things that we will be trying to encourage people is to look into absentee ballots. Absentee ballots are requested through the Secretary of State Wyoming page. And one of the things to understand is that you do not have to have a cause in order to get an absentee ballot. So if you feel like it would not pertain to you, that's not the case. It is free to everyone. Some important things to note is that for the primary this year, we are looking at no early voting in Wyoming due to COVID. Usually we have early voting for general election, but the primary is Tuesday, August 18th. So if you are returning absentee ballots, you will want to get everything in the mail by August 3rd, in person August 18th. For the general election, it will be November 3rd, and so in person is going to be November 3rd, and by mail October 19th. One of the important things is that you can register in person on the day of voting. If you are going to do that, you will need to fill out an application. You can also decide to turn it in by mail earlier than the elections. Go to their website, the Secretary of State website with Wyoming, and you can print it out and either mail it in or take it to your county clerk. The other thing is that you will need proof of identification with your application for registration. You do not need that for the day of voting itself, though. Some IDs that are accepted include tribal IDs, state IDs, driver's license, passport, military ID, school ID, if it is with the University of Wyoming or any of the community colleges in Wyoming, are also accepted. Some other important things to note is that even though we don't know what it's going to look like by November, a lot of the estimates are saying that COVID is still going to be around. So remember to wear a mask and be safe for yourself as well as for others. That's really important right now. One of the other things is we'll include some of these links, but if you are looking for your polling place, you can do vote411.org. You can also do vote.org to get information on registration, the Secretary of State.wyoming.gov, as well as rockthevote.org. All of these are very important resources just to find out more about how to register, voting deadlines, and also building a plan. So what are your plans for the day of? Are you okay on transportation, childcare? Have you talked to your business that you work for about anything in terms of time off and what that looks like? And Glenn, do you want me to talk about some issues that are happening in Wyoming for voting?
Yes, absolutely. That'd be
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you.
So in 2018, there were some issues that came about, including what was happening in Lander associated with the Wind River Reservation and people not basically coming into issues with how their tribal IDs were being accepted. And hopefully we will not see this year. The Democratic Party, as well as other voting officials, are being more cognizant of these problems and about appropriate training so that they are not being exclusionary to individuals on the reservation. The other thing is that we are trying to encourage people that they know that in Wyoming, you can regain your voting rights as someone who was a nonviolent felon who has done their time. The thing is, there is an application for that. You can find that online, and we can include that link as well down below. It is important to fill it out ahead of time as much as possible because this will be something that will take time to process. But once it has been accepted, you will get notified that your rights have been back in the book, if you will. So please be mindful of that, and be mindful that if you are running into any problems on the day of voting, that it is important to check out things on these resource pages, because if someone's saying you need an ID or something like that, sometimes it may feel like you have to stop or you just leave, but it's important to know you have the right to show even the voting officials, no, this is what it says on the page, as we saw in the case of 2018. So I think that's all I have. So thank you so much, Glenn.
No, thank you. That was so helpful. And as Sean said, hopefully attached to this recording, we're going to have some links so you can reread this information. And if you do have any specific questions, we as a campaign are always happy to reach out and share those resources with you personally. Donatellia, I saw you nodding quite a lot there, especially in regards to voting access in Wyoming. Would you like to just talk for a couple of minutes about that?
Yeah, so along with that, as a campaign and as like people with these values, we want to make sure that people are voting, and a lot of people. And just to be aware, I live in Laramie County, and we halved the amount of polling places that you can go in person. It was originally 14 and now is 7. What's frustrating is that it's saying that it's for COVID-19, but it's more people in like lesser places, so it's a little bit iffy as to why that reasoning was used for cutting the polling places in half. So I know that the Laramie County Democratic Party is pushing really hard for people to get absentee voting, and even regardless of what party you are in, we would just really encourage you to do absentee voting, both because it encourages just general voting uptick that we saw in the Laramie County Democratic Party, where I think they had like a 30% increase of voting registration and like voting participation. So and getting your absentee ballot is incredibly easy in Wyoming, other than filling out the form. And so there's no reason that you couldn't. You get it in your home, you get to look at the candidates, you don't have to choose right then if you didn't research. And I really encourage that, as well as encouraging your local officials to make sure that voting is accessible to the people that are around. Many of us live in rural communities. Many of us have to drive really far, and for cutting voting places, instead of it being like a 30-minute drive, it may end up being like an hour drive for some people, and that's just important to consider as we're cutting these places off for Wyoming. And so just being cognizant of that as we continue on to the primary and the general season. Thank you, Glenn.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so as we discussed on a local and national level, there really are a number of barriers to voting that we need to address. So a really useful example, I think, is coming this Tuesday. So we have a primary in Kentucky coming up, and voting places are being cut dramatically, from 3,700 places to 200. And most worryingly, there is going to be one polling place for over 500,000 registered voters in Louisville's Jefferson County, where half the state's Black voters live. And obviously, time and time again, we've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in multiple different states, where it is predominantly lower income areas, that have the access to voting curtailed during an election. Obviously, this isn't good enough. And we've discussed a couple of them, these policies that Yana's campaign has to address these things. So we've got automatic voter registration, Yana advocates for when people turn 18. We have restoring voting rights to people with felony convictions, which I personally think is really, really important, and letting people currently in prison vote, because they should absolutely still have a say, and I think it's disgraceful they don't. We also need to legitimize tribal IDs, as Sean was discussing earlier, for voting purposes, and really ensure that people have reasonable access to polling places, early voting, and mail-in ballots, especially during a pandemic. We saw in Wisconsin when they held the primary in person during what was and still is the peak of a pandemic, there was a spike in cases straight after, and it simply isn't safe for a lot of people with underlying health conditions to go to a polling place. Also, making election days, especially a general election, a holiday is something that Yana advocates for, and I think is a fantastic idea. Spencer, would you like to just jump in with a few of those ideas and just give us your perspective?
Yeah, so as far as, so I've seen the elections in a few different states, like I've been alive and living for that, and I would say that Wyoming's elections process is by far like the out of all the places I've lived, it's like the most accessible, I'd say. So we do have that going for us. I think that once you can actually get in touch with somebody and get your ballot to your house, it's definitely a good place to live and be able to vote. But I do think that, I mean, the issues that have been brought up are important. Like we do need to legitimize native IDs and stuff, like as a valid ID. And I was recently listening to a really good little blurb on the Wyoming public media about voting in Wyoming from Susan Simpson. She is the president of the League of Women Voters in Wyoming. And yeah, very good, recommend listening to it. And the dialogue is just very, very interesting, considering we are a state that is known for being the equality state, yet there is things that are still so glaring within our public policy that violate that doctrine of equality. So I think as voters and as people that are becoming more awake and alive in the political realm, it's important to like hold these people accountable, because we're good, but we're not as great as we can be.
Absolutely, thank you. And as you mentioned, Wyoming is one of the better states, thankfully, in terms of voting, especially in having 40 full days of early voting. I think that's something really, really important, and that it really does widen access for people. Just to wrap up, there's been some amazing points so far. Why do we think it's so important that we do vote, right? We've discussed access, we've discussed, barriers. Why is it that people, especially young people, as we're speaking as part of the Youth Caucus, why is it so vital that we make our voice heard in these elections, that we don't just think, you know what, there are issues with it, maybe I'll do it next time? Sean, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've kind of come to realize is that with how the Electoral College is set up in the United States, there are some states where you don't necessarily have as much of a say within your vote, and then there are some states that you have a lot to say. So some projections have stated that the 2016 was won really by 78,000 votes among some of these battleground states, which means 78,000 people out of 300 million. And we only had roughly 132 million out of 217, actually I think it's more, but I know it's 200 plus, have the ability to vote in the United States. We actually vote lower than a lot of other democratic countries around the world. And so I think, especially within the age group, you can do so much, because just going out there and getting your say is a really powerful thing, and because you can encourage your friends. And it is true that people listen to one another, especially those they feel close to. And so it is a ripple effect. If you can get 3 people to vote with you, they can get more people, and they can get more people. And that's how change is done, is through those ripples of relationships. And I do kind of want to say, so just for clarification, the tribal IDs in the state of Wyoming are allowed, but the problem is not all poll workers are trained to understand that. And so I just want to make that clear, that they are allowed for registration, and no voting ID is required at the polling place if they say it is. And even in states like South Dakota, the way they got around not accepting tribal IDs was because of the P.O. box situation, where they said, if you don't have a physical address, you cannot vote in the state of South Dakota. But even then, that shows just how they try to find those loopholes and disenfranchise groups, because they can't say a tribal ID doesn't count, but they can say this address type doesn't count, which is really part of the messed up thing. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Spencer, I saw you nodding. Do you want to jump in?
Muting and unmuting is a struggle. Thank you. First of all, thank you for that clarification, Sean. That was really, really good on that. I was nodding to that because there's more and more coming out of especially southern states where people are getting into trouble or being accused of voter fraud because of the not having a correct address thing, or like linking your address to somewhere where you're not actually living because you don't have a place to live or whatever. Like, the amount of hypocrisy that seems to be coming out and that seems to be making an appearance is exactly why we should be fired up to vote. Because, like, we as youth, we as people that are, again, coming into the voting world, like, we have the ability to change these things. Some kids got online and decided to go reserve seats at a Trump rally, and we saw physically what that did. So our voices, the things that we talk about, and the things that we give time to are important. And the same goes for voting. Like, if you want to influence your environment and you want to change things, then voting is a really good way to do that. So yeah, that's my blurb on that.
Thank you. Yes, and a great example of the half-empty rally we witnessed last night. I also want to stress the importance of voting down ballot, especially in the context of Yana's campaign, because often, even people in our age group, when we think of voting, we think solely presidential races. And there are so many fantastic candidates that are advocating for us at a local level, whether that's city council. We always forget you see a massive drop in voting, especially in our demographic, the lower down the ballot you get, right? And imagine if it was the opposite. If we voted locally more often, we would see so many people literally around us in our towns and cities that have our interests in mind and are going to cater more towards us because they know we're going to turn out to vote. I think there can be a sense, especially in local elections, that there's an assumption of apathy among our age group. And that makes it easier for people to run campaigns that really don't have us in mind, because you're not going to see people talking about student debt at a local level when they really should be. And what I love about Yana's campaign is it really opens this conversation up, these national ideas, taking them from here and putting them directly in Wyoming, and talking about stuff like a Green New Deal that affects us. I'm worried about having children in a world that could be, and probably will be, unless we see substantial change, dreadfully unsafe for young people. And it's going to be us and our kids that bear the brunt of that. Donatellia, do you want to close us with a few points about just, I guess, voting locally, especially in our race we're running, as you probably all know, who are hopefully watching, for US Senate. But I think of it as a very local campaign. We're bringing those national issues and we're really making them relevant to Wyoming. Yeah, Donatellia, would you like to wrap us up?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to also point out a few things, like the mention of the Wyoming League of Women Voters. They make it really easy to know your candidates. They are nonpartisan. They ask the same questions. They are fantastic. So it makes researching and educating yourself on your local level to your state level candidates, very, very easy. I highly recommended like following them and looking at their stuff. And then also, again, putting on to like Glenn, like the mayor tends to do the budget for police and what that budget is. And so, you know, if you're upset about police brutality, which we all should, it's the mayor. You know, public activities and community-led activities in cities and states are based from like the mayor election of the city council. So it's really important, especially for Wyoming, as we're trying to diversify our economy because we have to, and keep our young people here. It's also that lower ballot elections. And then the other thing that I want to say is that just to drive the nail home, that there is such a little percentage of voter fraud that even if it did exist, it would be such a minuscule fraction to the amount of whether or not even, and they include it in like absentee voting, early ballot voting, and machines, it's minuscule. So you do not have to worry about that for absentee voting. And so I guess for like the last little things, it's important for us young people to have our voices heard, because this is the world we're inheriting. And if we don't like it, part of the reason that we do protests and legislation is to get the vote into. You have to do all of them. And so I think that's important for us to like drive home in voting, is that on top of the things that you see and share and educating yourself, that your vote is also your right and your privilege. And in some ways it is your privilege if you're not a felon, and or if you're not, you know, a Black, Indigenous person of color. And so, you know, that's one way that you can use your privilege to actively help the people around you in your communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree. And I think information goes hand in hand with voting. The more people hear and see candidates, the more likely they are to be engaged. And on that note, Yana was at the first candidate forum. It was this Friday. It was in Gillette. It was hosted by the League of Women Voters, who, as we mentioned, are such a brilliant resource for advocacy in a nonpartisan way. And we are hopefully going to get a copy of that early this week. And we're going to be putting clips of Yana's responses onto our Facebook page, on Twitter. And that's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the campaign right now. Yeah, we're going to wrap up. I think that was fantastic. Thank you all for being here. As always, if you have any questions or you want to stay up to date with the campaign, please check our social media. If you're watching this and you want to get involved with the campaign, feel very welcome to find me on Facebook, Glenn Houlihan, or message the page. We're going to be starting regular Youth Caucus-led phone banks every Thursday, hopefully, starting this week. So please do get in touch with us if you want to get involved. And yeah, have a lovely rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Glenn, for co-hosting as always.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Glenn.